Hi there, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am doing yet another installment in the Freelancer Q&A series that I've been doing on this channel for a few years now. Today's question is relatively short and sweet. Should freelancers use SEO for lead generation? And this is one of those that I'll answer kind of like definitively right in the beginning instead of like, stringing you along and trying to have a cliffhanger until the end. Like, no, probably you shouldn't do SEO as a lead generation channel if you're a freelancer. That's unlikely to be a good fit. So my very short answer to the question of whether a freelancer should do SEO or not is probably not, almost certainly not. So for the rest of the video, I'll talk about why it is that I say that, but let me start by kind of describing what SEO is. Now, I imagine that most people watching have some kind of preconceived notion of it. You might have an unfond notion of it. A lot of people do for reasons that are understandable. There is a practice that I tend to think of as scumbag SEO, where you're kind of trying to trick the search engine into ranking your content with things like link spam or keyword stuffing or all kinds of things. You go to a recipe site and they just can't get to the point and they have to tell you about their grandmother or whatever. All of that stuff is unpleasant things that people are doing in an effort to trick the search engine into ranking their content more favorably. This is not how I like to think of SEO. I kind of a long time ago coined this idea that I prefer to think of it as a searcher experience optimization rather than search engine optimization. So philosophically speaking, whenever somebody types a so-called keyword into the search engine, what they're doing is they're asking some kind of question. So if you type in something like Chinese restaurants, what you're really asking are what are some Chinese restaurants near me? And you're hoping that the search result might pop a map or it's going to show you a list of restaurants that you might consider ordering from. And that's kind of generally how it works. I would challenge you to think of any thing that you would type into the search by and large that isn't a question you're asking of some kind and you're just leaving words out of it. So what search engine optimization, or as I like to think of it, searcher experience optimization really is about, is creating content that answers the question you infer that somebody's asking. And as I like to say, doing it on a site that doesn't suck to visit. So forget the pop-ups and the spam and the scams and all the stuff. If you're doing this right, at least as I see it right, you are figuring out who you would like to have on your website. You're figuring out what kind of questions that person asks the search engine in the form of keywords. And then you're targeting those keywords by answering those questions. So I would think of a good site as being a site that just answers a lot of people's questions. So to me, this is what SEO done right is. You have a URL when you're doing SEO and you're trying to get people onto your site. Each URL on your site, at least that you're indexing and trying to get to rank in Google, is asking a question that some human being out there is answering a question that some human being out there is asking. And I think that's important because a lot of people in my mind have the wrong mental model of SEO. A lot of people think it's like sprinkling some stuff or changing tags or doing stuff to Yoast and WordPress, that you're kind of like creating a piece of content and then like doing SEO to it in some white, gray, or black hat capacity to try to trick the search engine into showing people your content. And I would dispute that. I would say that you could actually do pretty well in SEO if all you did was go into Google and you like typed in something that you wanted to rank for or that you wanted to talk about, and you looked at the people also ask and you kept clicking on those. If you just took all those people also ask questions and wrote blog posts that were just titled the question, you would actually over the course of time produce a lot of traffic to your site because you would just be telling or you would be answering questions that the search engine is telling you people ask. So this is what I think of as SEO in general. You are finding questions that ideally your buyers have and are asking, and then you are creating content that addresses those questions. And you're probably doing this as somewhat of a volume play. So this is doing SEO, and that's what it's going to take in order for you to get traffic onto your site. You're going to have to figure out topically relevant questions people are asking, answer them on a site that's decent to visit, and ideally for winnable terms that aren't overly difficult. So given that, why am I saying that freelancers would not really be well served to use this as a channel? So the first thing that I would ask you to understand is that SEO done right, there's some serious economies of scale concern. Meaning, if you stand up a website and you write one single article on it, that article probably won't do anything. If you write 10, you might be starting to gain some traction. If you write 100 or 1,000, now you're really going to be getting somewhere. The traffic to your site will vary non-linearly, more than linearly, with the amount of content that you produce. So what this means is that SEO as a channel is subject to so-called economies of scale. You're going to do a lot better for having more content. And in a sense, you might argue it's a game not worth playing unless you're going to devote some volume to it. And in fact, I would argue that to do it decently as a channel, you will need to spend 6 figures on it. So figure $100,000 or more. Now that might be in the form of your labor. Like you might just do this yourself. You might write hundreds of blog posts over the course of a couple of years and sort of like incur all of that cost as a form of labor, or you could pay someone. So if you were going to hire people to write blog posts, you'd figure you'd need to pay at least a few $100s each for those blog posts. Now imagine that you're doing hundreds of blog posts. Obviously, that's going to add up. So it is an expensive channel. That is thing number one. And that probably makes it too expensive for freelancers, especially given consideration two, which is that as a freelancer, if you're doing like freelance app dev, which a lot of the audience for this probably would, or like high ticket freelance services, there's a pretty decent chance that the value of a customer for you is, $50, $100, $200,000. Like if you're working with 1-2 customers a year, you are going to have customers that give you a lot of money, and you're not going to turn over customers all that frequently. So if you want to have enough leads in your pipeline to do business as freelance app dev, you don't need all that many sales conversations. You don't need all that many prospects. The way that search engine traffic tends to work is that it tends to be a volume game. I mean, there are some exceptions, and I'm not going to get into those here, but for the most part, you would just be trying to build up a good amount of traffic to your site. And just to understand, for those of you that might not be familiar, I have a site, deadtech.com, where I built a pretty substantial following. And in that site's heyday, I want to say I was doing 500, 700,000 visitors a year. And as a lead gen channel, it wasn't, all that big a lead generator for my static analysis and consulting practice. Might have gotten a handful of people in through that channel. But, so just as something to bear in mind, I managed to build 500,000 plus visitors a year to that site through my content creation. And it still didn't really function as that significant of a lead generation channel. It was not nearly as productive for me as word of mouth, where people were telling other people about my work that I had done work with in the past. So you are opening up a volume channel if you're going to use it to generate significant leads, and you don't really need that much volume if you're just a one-person show. The other thing is, if you're going to pick out some terms, so say that you're, doing C# development or C# web development or something, most of the terms that you might try to show up for in search would be something like C# web developer. Those terms are going to be extremely difficult to win because they have what's called high commercial intent. So if you do, I think of these as yellow pages searches. If you're getting in front of people when they're Googling the labor that you do, there is a ton of competition to rank for those sorts of things. So the amount of time and effort that you would have to spend on SEO for that is disproportionately high to just ranking for, like some tutorials you create about C#. It'll be way harder to rank for C# developer, or C# freelancer or something. So it'll be very difficult. And worse, it's going to commodify your labor. So it's kind of like being in the yellow pages. If any of you are, of the older variety like me, and you know what that is, it's just like an index of people who do the commodified thing that you're looking for. So if you pop open a phone book and you start looking for plumber, you're not really looking for a specific plumber, like the one and only unique plumber. You're just looking for the first cheapest person to come out and fix your toilet. So if you're doing that, if you're commodifying your labor through a lead generation channel, and you're competing in a very commodified space, you are going to have buyers that view you as a commodity, and they're going to be viewing your labor as kind of a race to the bottom. They're, probably what they're really looking for is the cheapest C# developer. So that's what you're going to be up against if you're using that channel. And I guess kind of tied in with all of this, it's also a it's it's a tough lead generation channel for something that's going to be a high touch sales process. So if you're selling application development, most likely you're going to need to do at least one phone call before they agree to hire you, probably multiple phone calls, or you might even be doing like in-person meetings or something like that. It is kind of hard to get somebody who lands on your site for the first time ever, having no idea who you are, to then engage with you in an expensive sales process that takes a long time. Usually, the moment somebody first encounters your brand, they're not ready to commit to you. So you need to have some kind of plan for what's called nurture. So when this prospective buyer lands on your site, unless you're targeting a very transactional, high intent term, let's say you're writing tutorials about C# because you want to get development managers onto your site or something like that. So what's probably going to happen if you're creating C# tutorials is you're going to have to get in, or you're going to get individual contributor C# developers onto your site, and then like hope they tell their boss about you, and then hope the boss calls you for a phone call. Or you're going to try to come up with topics that maybe managers or hiring authorities might search. And then if you do that, it's still unlikely that the first time they hit their site, they're going to be like, oh, great, I'll give you a call right now. So you would need to come up with some way to keep being in touch with them, get them to sign up for your mailing list, get them to follow you on social media. So you need a fairly long and involved plan to take this person from hitting your website for the first time to becoming enough of a reasonable prospect that they're going to do multiple phone calls with you and think about giving you tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for the channel SEO to work, there's a lot of things that you would need to overcome. And this is kind of why I'm saying the odds that you're going to make all of these things true and turn SEO and turn search engine traffic more broadly into a productive channel for a freelance practice, it's just really low. It's not what I would pick. I mean, it's doable, but it's an extremely inefficient channel compared to just coming to understand maybe where your buyers hang out and going and being in the Slacks that they're in, or word of mouth, or maybe creating content on a channel like LinkedIn where you think they might be. All of those prospecting activities are much more likely to be productive than a volume channel like SEO. Now, that being said, as you evolve in your practice, and I talk about this a lot, but you would probably, I think of freelancing as kind of an intermediate state between being employed and going on to be a business owner. Freelancing, service-based business or service practice, if you're just kind of hanging out your shingle and saying I'm a C# developer, I would encourage you to try to find a niche, to become more specialized, to develop productized services or a product or something like that. It's a much easier long-term path to business ownership. Now, if you're doing those things, there might be a moment where you start to think of SEO as a potentially more appealing channel. So one of those might be if you are if you're developing a productized service. So instead of just providing miscellaneous C# development labor, if you are building websites as a specific offering under specific circumstances. Like I build websites that are based on this for this type of client. The more specific that you can get, the more specifically you can identify a buyer and an ideal customer profile. What you can start to do with SEO is you can start to create content that attracts searchers in a framework that is sometimes called jobs to be done. You start to understand your buyers well enough to understand what kind of things they would Google, what kind of questions they would ask the search engine. Once that's true, you start to be able to get kind of a stream of fairly well qualified and segmented people to your site. And then you can much more easily brainstorm how you would get in touch with them. So if you know who specifically needs C# websites or whatever the case may be, and you're getting them onto your site, it gets easier to appeal to them with something like a mailing list or retargeting or what have you. This gets to be increasingly true if you have a productized service or some kind of offering that is at a lower entry price point on your offering ladder. So for instance, let's say that you're doing, again, some form of C# web development. Maybe you start to do a kind of paid discovery that's like a $2,000 phone call or series of calls, where you do something of value for your buyer. Now, at the higher end of your offering ladder might be, $50 or $100,000 worth of app dev, but you might have some kind of assessment you're doing for $2,000. If you have the kind of offering that somebody can land on your site and buy with a credit card, or like filling out a form or something like that, the more somebody can self-serve on your site towards your offering, the lower the price point, the easier it is for them to make a decision about working with you. The shorter the gap that you need to bridge between them becoming aware of you and them buying from you. Now, this can get even further down the entry level price point offering if you have something like an ebook or something that they can buy for like $20. So the lower a price point introductory offering you have, the more and more likely SEO becomes as a channel, because the easier it is to get somebody to start doing business with you if you have these lower ticket offerings. So those are all, things that you might think of. If you're finding that you're moving toward productized services, if you're identifying a niche and you're able to zoom in more specifically on an ideal customer profile and on a buyer, if you are able to introduce a lower price point offering, all of those are reasons that you might want to rethink my earlier advice and say, okay, at this point, maybe SEO could be a decent channel. Now, if you're going to do that, I would recommend, this is actually something we've been developing with clients over the course of time, and I've just recently kind of formalized this. It's what I think of as an SEO MVP. And for us, when we do this, it's about identifying kind of a minimum content set that you can create. We might want to call this 10 to 20 pieces of content that are pretty well segmented. So you would create these pieces of content to try to prove end to end that you could get the right people onto your site through search, even if it's, a relatively modest sum of people like 500 or 1,000 per month. You're getting them onto the site through search, and then you're proving that you can do something productive with them. So if you have this ebook type of offering, you would be trying to prove that, some of the people that land on your site buy the ebook. If you have kind of a mid-level pricing offering, maybe it's getting people to sign up for a mailing list, or maybe you're going to run some retargeting where you're targeting them again through LinkedIn or through Facebook. And then you want to prove that through that channel, you can get people to sign up to do business with you. So what I'm getting at is, if you decide that you think SEO is a reasonable offering, don't create some quixotic plan to, write 100 or 200 pieces of content and just bang your head against that for a year. Come up with like a minimum set of content that you think you could produce, form a hypothesis so that it'll let you make better decisions up front about how to evaluate the channel. I'm going to create this many pieces of content. I'm going to try to get this amount of people per month onto the site. I'm going to expose them to these types of offerings or calls to action. And then I'm going to evaluate that after 3 months. And I'm going to make a decision about whether to say, whoops, this isn't the channel for me, and, not a big loss at this point, or whether to say, I think I can make this work, I'm going to tune it, or wow, this is a home run, I'm going to scale it up. So if you decide that you want to start pursuing a volume channel like this, don't just do this, endlessly and hope for the best. Run an actual experiment with a hypothesis, and then make sure that you preset points to evaluate the efficacy of that channel. So, to summarize here, SEO for freelancers, almost certainly not a good channel. It's too high volume. It's the wrong fit for your buying process. But as your business evolves, as your practice evolves, there may later come a point where it makes sense, and then make sure that you're forming a reasonable hypothesis when it does about what you want to do from there. So hopefully that makes sense and is helpful, and I will catch you all next time.